Thank you, Pauline. It's a great privilege to be here, and I want to congratulate the Royal Society of Chemistry for all its work in sport and education, and in particular for hosting this lecture on bringing science to the Olympics and Paralympics. Podium was mentioned there. That's an organisation set up by all the universities and colleges in the country to try to encourage everybody to see the Olympics and Paralympics as an opportunity to celebrate their talents, their disciplines. Just to give one example, Leona Lewis at the closing ceremony in Beijing appeared in a dress which attracted much comment. That was designed by students from the London College of Fashion. And that was the first point, I think, at which students outside sport saw that whether you were in the arts, the most creative of arts, the creative sciences, you could make a contribution, and you could certainly find that people would be stimulated by the Olympics and Paralympics. So, here we are tonight with two guest speakers, Claire Brosnan and Dr. David Hassel. Claire is the Programme Director for GSK's London 2012 Olympic and Paralympic Partnership, and is responsible for ensuring that, in particular, the opportunities for maximising employee engagement are there throughout London 2012, and GSK has some 100,000 employees worldwide. Dave is a scientist whose PhD was in biochemistry, and after working on that at the Royal Free Hospital School of Medicine, University of London, he went straight into the pharmaceutical industry, at first with Judy Searle, then with GlaxoSmithKline. Had a period at Imperial College London and returned to GSK, working then in investigative preclinical toxicology. And so looking at rationalising toxicological issues as they arose on novel compounds. In particular, that affects therapeutic targets in a wide range of areas. And he's working in the respiratory therapeutic area in particular as Director of Inhaled Sciences. He's leading a cross-matrix team to complement GSK's discovery of novel inhaled medicines. And he's also going to be a doping control station manager in London 2012. My main role this evening will be after their presentation in encouraging you to ask questions. But for now, I'm very pleased on your behalf to welcome Claire and Dave.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you very much to the Royal Society of Chemistry for inviting me to come and talk to you this evening. My name is Claire Brosnan, and as Simon introduced, I have the absolute privilege of leading GSK sponsorship of London 2012. Now, those of you who are familiar with GSK might have seen the biggest Olympic advertising site in London, which is on the side of our building. And we're particularly proud of this sign because we have a small competitor in Coca-Cola who is based just down the road in Hammersmith, who apparently put our sign up in one of their board meetings. And the conversation went something like, their sign is bigger than our sign, we need to do something about it. So, you know, always the competitor, it's always nice to get one over on Coca-Cola. Now, we're here obviously to talk about GSK's involvement in the Olympic Games, but just before we go ahead and do that, let's just take a moment really to think about the Olympic Games in all its enormity. We know that it is the most recognised brand in the world. It presents GSK with a very unique sponsorship, and I'll talk to you about that a little bit more. There is going to be over 70,000 volunteers during the London 2012 Games, so it really is a huge event. If you were lucky enough to be one of the 8 million people that have got tickets, then well done you. You will get to enjoy over 26 sports from over 10,500 athletes from 205 countries that will be competing over the 2 weeks of the Olympic Games. And I guess staggeringly, the Olympic Games attracts the world's biggest TV audience of 4 billion people globally, which is pretty big. Just out of interest, does anybody know what the second biggest global TV event is, sporting event? Super Bowl? Any other? No, it is the Paralympic Games. And fortuitously, we are also a sponsor of the Paralympic Games. So there is a 1.8 billion global audience for the Paralympic Games. There will be 4,200 athletes competing in this summer's Paralympic Games across 162 countries. They will be competing in 471 medal events. There will be 2 million tickets across 20 sports, and across both the games there will be over 4,700 medals that will be up for grabs. So if you love your sport, then this really is going to be a great summer for London. But back on to GSK and our role in the Olympic and Paralympic Games. How are we bringing science to the Olympics and to the Paralympics? Well, we have the very snappy title of Official Laboratory Services Provider, which basically means that we will be providing all of the anti-doping laboratory services to the Games, and we will be doing that in partnership with King's College London. And as you can see from the quote there from Sir Andrew Whitty, our CEO, it really provides us with a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for GSK to use its science expertise and make a real material contribution to London 2012. This is really about showcasing what GSK is very good at and being able to bring our skills in a very material and tangible and meaningful way to London 2012. Now, we've got a nice quote here from Sebco in terms of our involvement, and I think it's a great quote because it really talks about the fact that we're making or helping to make London 2012 the fairest Games possible. And that's really important, I think, to both athletes and also to spectators. And as a company with science at its heart, then GlaxoSmithKline is perfectly placed to be providing the world-class laboratory facilities to be able to do that. As I said, we'll be doing this in partnership with King's College in London, and together with the team there, we will have the capability to carry out more doping tests than ever before. I'm sure I don't need to convince you that science can play a massive role in sport, and we are really hoping, along with Lord Coe, that the London 2012 Games inspires more young people to take up roles in sports science as future careers. And we have specific programmes that GSK is really dedicating using the inspiration of the London 2012 Olympic and Paralympic Games to try and do just that. And I'll talk to you in a little bit more detail about that, as will Dave. So exactly what are we doing across the Games? Well, we are lucky enough to be able to have one of my colleagues, Dave, here, who's actually going to be talking to you in a very granular way in terms of his experiences and what he is able to do as one of the anti-doping control station managers at the Games. But really on a macro scale, GSK is going to be providing the Anti-Doping Lab. That lab is going to be open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week during the Olympic and Paralympic Games. It's going to be carrying out over 5,000 tests during the Olympic Games and over 1,250 tests for the Paralympic Games. And that is more tests than any other Games. And as I say, we're working in partnership with King's College, and this is really quite a unique sponsorship and opportunity for GSK, because it's the first time that an organising committee of the Olympic Games has, I guess, tendered out this kind of sponsorship to a commercial partner. In the past, it's always been the responsibility of the organising committee to source a partner to do this for them, but it's the first time that they've really brought in a partner such as GSK to be able to do that. So we feel very privileged, we feel very honoured to be able to be partnering with LOCOG and King's to be able to fulfil this really important function of the Games. But it's not just about what happens at the Games. We have a very important legacy that we would like to leave and to continue long after the athletes have gone home. And that really is all about an agreement that we have signed along with some other pharmaceutical companies with the World Anti-Doping Agency. And it's a long-term agreement that we have signed with those that will mean that we will supply confidential information about our medicines in pipeline to supply to WADA. And the intention of that is that by supplying that information early enough, that WADA will be able to devise tests so that when these drugs come onto the market, which could potentially be used for sports-related drug abuse, that those tests will already exist so that we can basically manage the integrity of the games right from the get-go, from when those drugs are on the market, and that we're not trying to play catch-up with the drug cheats. So it really is a kind of a lasting legacy in terms of not only the health of the athletes that are involved, but really the integrity of sport going forward. But before I hand over to Dave to really talk you through his role and what GSK is able to offer, I just wanted to take a moment to really talk about how important our partnership with London 2012 is to GSK as a company and to its employees. We have run a pretty substantial employee engagement program. It's one of the key reasons why GSK was so interested in becoming a partner of the Games, so that we could really take that to our 100,000 employees and use that to really inspire them in terms of what GSK is doing. And we've devised a campaign called Team GSK, and everyone who works for GSK globally is part of Team GSK by the very nature of the fact that they work for GSK, and also the nature of the fact that our sponsorship. But we put together a global series of initiatives that every single employee could participate in, so that really we were trying to empower everybody to feel part of the Games and the spirit of the Olympics and Paralympics, and for them to feel like we could help them to achieve more and to inspire others around them to do so. So we have put together a coherent program of initiatives based on kind of mass participation. This was really aimed to make sure that as many people as possible could benefit from our relationship and feel just more valued, and I think a little bit more proud of GSK for what it's doing. And this kind of really came into four key elements. The first is about tickets, and no surprise that you talk to any GSK employee and the first question that they asked you was, how can I get hold of a ticket? And I am proud to say that GSK is the only London 2012 partner that has used 100% of its ticket allocation to its employees. We're not taking any media, we're not taking any trade. They've all gone to our employees. And Andrew Whitty, our CEO, has really led by example and said that nobody within the business will be going to the Games unless they've earned their ticket in the same way, which I think is really honourable. And we ran a competition, a global competition, where you could nominate. You could either nominate a colleague or nominate yourself if you wanted to win a ticket based on how you demonstrated some joint GSK and Olympic values. And that was incredibly successful. We had 83 markets around the world, GSK markets, that entered that competition with over 2,000 entries. So I personally read all of those entries, and they were very humbling and very inspiring. So very pleased that we've got our winners from that, who will all be flying in from across the world to come to the Olympics this summer. We also had a couple of torchbearer places, and we had 2 torchbearer places. And again, we ran a global competition where people could nominate others or themselves to be one of the GSK torchbearers, and their runs are coming up in the next couple of weeks. We also ran a program called Gold Challenge, which is an external program that we linked into, where we were asking all of our 100,000 employees globally to get into a team, form a team together, and to basically complete 2,012 kilometres in 2012, whether that by cycling, walking, horse riding, canoeing, however they wanted to. That had a real charity focus. You could raise money for over 150 charities while doing that. And I think it's left a real legacy. Not only are we the largest corporate partner of Gold Challenge, but I think already our employees have already covered enough kilometres to kind of circumvent the world about 5 times. So hopefully part of our legacy is just some increased health and well-being of our 100,000 employees. But an important part of our partnership was how we could offer the chance to our GSK employees to really get involved in the Olympics. And we could do that via a couple of ways. We have 10 of our GSK employees that are going to be working throughout the Olympic and Paralympic Games as anti-doping managers. And Dave is one of those people, and I won't steal his thunder by saying what that is, but he's going to talk to you in detail about what that means for him in terms of his role. But we're also supplying some doping team support staff who are going to be based out at LOCOG's head office, supporting those teams as well. We've got a series of initiatives called Orange Days, which is where every single GSK employee gets a paid day off a year to go and do some good work in their local community. And what we've asked our employees this year to do is to really bring the Olympic and Paralympic spirit to life in their local community. Importantly, though, one of our factors, which Dave will go into a little bit more detail about, is science education. As I said, we really wanted to use the power of the Olympics and Paralympics to inspire young people to consider science as a future career. And we have a programme called Scientists in Sport, which is a very big science education programme. And I'm pleased to say it's an award-winning programme. It's a really great programme where we're really using the power of sport to really encourage kids to kind of come in and kind of pretend that they're drug testers for the day. And again, we've worked with King's College on that, and it's a programme that goes down phenomenally well. Combined with that, we've also got an online hub, so we've used an internal intranet site to really engage our employees, and we've also got a series of ambassadors, which I'll just come on to talk about in a moment. But I think before I do that, I'm just going to show you a short video in terms of our involvement internally. And I think the real hero of obviously any Olympic or Paralympic Games is the athletes themselves in terms of their training, their hard work, their commitment. And I'm really pleased to say that we've partnered with all of the athletes that you can see here. So Beth Tweddle, Philip Zadowo, Marlon Devonish, Graham Edmonds, who's a Paralympian, Kelly Southerton, who unfortunately has now retired, Tanni Gray-Thompson, who is retired, but she's very prevalent obviously still within the administration of sport and around the anti-doping around sport, and then also David Weir. And I'd just like to say a little watch this space in the next couple of weeks, because you might start seeing a little bit more of these people out in the media representing GSK. So thank you very much for your time and allowing me to talk to you about our partnership. I'm now going to hand over to Dave, who's going to talk to you in more detail around how exactly he is bringing science to the Games.
Thank you, Claire. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me all right? So, like Claire and Simon before me, I would like to thank the Royal Society of Chemistry for the opportunity tonight to come down and talk a little bit to you about what I'm doing over the summer months this year. A little bit out of the ordinary, really, from my perspective in terms of this role. It's about 4 weeks before I change from a GSK employee to a low-cog employee, in the sense of being in venue and fulfilling the role. But tonight, what I'd like to try and do is just to give you a snapshot, perhaps a little bit superficially, of some of the things that I've been involved in, and how the process works, if you like, in terms of how the anti-doping process will work throughout the Olympic Games and the Paralympic Games. So, as Claire has already mentioned, GSK is making quite a significant commitment to the Olympic Games this summer. Advertising aside, giant opportunity to see the 2012 logo emblazoned, and I think it's something like 28 million people are likely to see this over the time since it's been up. But also the laboratory that's been provided to allow all the tests to be done. Now, this is operated by King's College, so GSK has provided the infrastructure and the facilities. But under Professor David Cowan, the accredited laboratory is under his control, and everything is done by King's. So, as Claire said, the greatest show on earth. Who wouldn't want to be involved in that, and to be part in some way in both the Olympics and the Paralympics? And I guess we have to recognise that it's not simply just one event. It's not simply one set. It's not athletics like the athletics events that are put on periodically, or cricket event or whatever. It's where an enormous number of sports all come together at once, one place, one time. So it is quite unique and quite special. And I think to have it in the UK, the last time I had it was 1948. So it really is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to have this in this city. So I think, the excitement I expect will rise considerably over the next few weeks. Why me? What kind of attracted me? And I do apologise for the picture. It's rather scary. But this is me a few years ago now. But I've been a passionate runner all my life. Since my late teens, I took an interest in running. And I've run a number of events. Anything from 800 metres on the track up to the marathon. I was a competitive member of Blackheath Harriers for many years. So I've run in national competitions, national 12-stage road relay, national cross-country championships. And I've run anything, in between. It was funny, I started off, I watched a friend of mine run one of the London marathons, and I thought, I fancy doing that. Not realising what that actually meant. And I did about 3 months training for it. And at the end of it, I was sort of... I managed to run all the way, but it was a real struggle, and it really opened my eyes to how much effort and energy you actually have to put in as an athlete to be able to perform well. But over time, I managed to improve my time, so they got better and better. And then a colleague of mine in Blackheath Harriers said, well, the London Marathon's a nice thing to do, but in terms of an event, it's once a year. And to be an athlete, you've got to be racing every weekend. So I switched completely, and I haven't run a marathon since. So I moved more to track and cross country. But from that, I've got, I was a reasonable standard club runner, nothing more. But it gave me a certain insight into at least what you need to do to train and the effort you have to put in. To be a reasonable club runner, I used to run 70 to 90 miles a week. And that's, that doesn't get you that far, actually. So you have to do an awful lot more. So I always admire and impressed by the athletes. But I've also been a career scientist. I've worked in a couple of pharmaceutical companies over the time. I've also worked in academia. And what surprised me, actually, when I had the opportunity to have this role, is I actually looked on the WADA site just before I was interviewed for the job. And I was quite surprised, actually, that one of the drugs I've worked on in my career was actually on the list. And so it made my jaw drop, and I thought, well, good grief, you know, I wasn't aware of that. But when I thought about it, I kind of understand why. I mean, at the time, I was working in cardiovascular diseases, and we were very much interested in metabolic syndrome, which is an aberration in lipid metabolism. And we were interested in a certain type of receptor. And what we found out as part of the drug discovery process, that this particular receptor had the ability to shift fatty acid metabolism, particularly in muscle, but also move it around in fat. So what it had the potential to do was to improve endurance performance in muscle. And somebody later on, a gentleman at the Salk Institute called Ron Evans, produced what's called a transgenic mouse. And so they overexpressed this protein into the muscles of mice. And they ended up with something they call the marathon mouse. And if you go and if you go Google it, you can see the marathon mouse. It's quite an impressive little creature. It looks like an ordinary mouse, but you put it on a treadmill with an ordinary mouse next to it, and you let the mice just run, and the normal mouse gets worn out pretty quickly, falls off the back of the conveyor belt and sits there quite happily grooming itself. Marathon mouse can run for over a mile. So for a mouse, that's quite amazing. So for me, you know, as I say, it was a surprise. But what this does, I guess, is it brings two passions of mine together. I've been passionate about what I've done in running over the years, and I've been passionate about science. So when I saw the advert which came out in GSK for the opportunity to work as a doping control station manager, I thought, I've got to do it, you know. So I applied, and I'm very grateful that I was accepted to be such. So what I'll be doing, my role, I'm going to be a doping control station manager, and I've been given the opportunity to work in the velodrome for the track cycling, and at Hadley Farm, which is out towards Southend, where they're doing the mountain biking, and then for the Paralympics in the Athletes' Village. So I'm getting an opportunity to look at quite a diverse set of events across the Games and the Paralympic Games. But what's that meant? Well, clearly I've not been involved in this sort of process before as a sportsman, so I've had to try and get an understanding of how this process operates. And it's quite amazing how, if you think about the logistics involved, you're talking about an event that takes place once every 4 years, coming together for a very short period of time, and then all dissipating again. So the numbers of people involved in the complexity is tremendous, you know. I was out at Hadley Farm yesterday, and you know, the engineering work that's going on, the people that are you know, building the infrastructures and putting all the gantries up for the cameras and the seating, huge amounts of activity going on that probably, you know, you won't see during games time, because it'll all hopefully run so smoothly. But I've had to get to know the venues I've worked in. I've had as I say, I've been out and about looking at them and getting a feel for them. There are certain things that I'm unfamiliar with. Certainly in GSK, I no need to use a radio. So, you know, how you use these radios, which channels you have to listen to. You have to listen to what sport are saying. You have to listen to all these different functional areas that are taking that have to be integrated. Have to get to know a lot of the people. Working in different venues, but a lot of the people are dedicated to a venue, so it's getting to know them and at least what their function is and who are the most important people to interact with, because as a doping control station manager you have to interact with quite a lot of them. So it's protocol, it's the medal ceremony people, it's transport, it's cleaning, it's all sorts of different things. So, and you have to be able to coordinate all of this in one smooth operation. But it's of course about getting to know the procedures as well. Is how do London 2012 want to take the athletes through the doping control process, and it's that the athletes are at the heart of this, and the hope is that the athletes will be, you know, well treated all the way through, and they won't have to wait, and it'll be as fussless as possible, if that's the right word. I've also had the opportunity to go and see an event live. I went to the UCI meeting that was held in February at the Velodrome. And there that was the first time I could actually see it in operation. I was back of house, as they say. You start to get used to some of the terminology they start to use. So I was at the doping control station while this event was going on. But I did get the opportunity to go onto what's called the field of play, which is the sort of central piece where all the bikes are, all the mechanics are, all the teams are. So I've had the opportunity. I was standing next to Sir Chris Hoy for a while there, while he was preparing to go out and do a little piece. These ladies here, I don't know if any of you saw it on television, but they broke the world record for the team pursuit. Another interesting piece that I wasn't aware of is that because they broke the world record, they have a choice whether they want to have the world record accredited or not. If they do, they all have to be dope tested, just to make sure that they're clean. And they chose to do that on that evening. But we'd run out of lady chaperones at the time, so I was asked if I would mind covering for them. So I did get the opportunity to chaperone the then world record holders, which was quite nice. So it gave me some feel for, you know, how the process was going to work. So talk a little bit about that, and I'll try and embellish a little bit more as I go on. But I guess, you know, is this process about doping limited to specific sports? Because quite often you hear, or everybody's aware about anabolic steroids and what anabolic steroids do. So, you know, is it just about that? And the reality is no, because since the advent of anabolic steroids, and everybody knows and understands what they do now in terms of muscle bulk and endurance and recovery, of course the pharmaceutical industry has continued to develop different types of drug. And so you end up in a situation where there are different drugs that can work in different environments. I mean, if you take the middle frame of that, it may not necessarily be the athlete. In that particular instance, it could be the horse. And in fact, things in the past have been detected in horses, and individuals have lost their medal because of that. But also, you know, different drugs do different things. So, you know, as an archer or someone shooting a gun, you need a steady hand, you need to be calm so that you're accurate. So different drug, different effect. You might not necessarily want to take a beta blocker if you're a sprinter. So you certainly wouldn't want your heart slowing down when you're trying to race the 100 metres. So, excuse the puns, it's a kind of horses for courses type of situation. Which means that, you know, the doping control has to cover all the bases to make sure that, you know, all of the knowns and unknowns are screened. So why test? Well, I think at the end of the day, I mean, as someone who's at least been competing at least at a relatively low level, I think I would be aggrieved if I found out that, you know, people were sort of having an unfair advantage. So I can understand that, you know, anybody who wants to compete wants to feel that they are competing on a, you know, a relatively flat playing field. I think there is an element of that, but there's also, you know, pressure these days to perform, and if you perform well, of course, then there are potentially rewards to be gained. So I guess there's a different situation where people potentially see, you know, opportunities to enhance their lifestyle as a consequence of performance. So I can understand some of the drivers that might make people seek a little advantage, perhaps, in improving their capability. And it isn't just limited to athletes. I mean, as we know, there's an awful lot of reported doping in all sorts of different sports these days. But I think one thing that people forget, though, is that drugs were actually made to treat patients who are not well. They're not for healthy people, normally. I can't think of any that are off the top of my head. And therefore, as a consequence, there is a downside if you abuse that in terms of being an athlete. And I think some of the understanding now around what steroids did historically have slowly come to the fore. People's life longevity has been reduced. For ladies, facial hair, lowering of the voice, which are irreversible. So there are some severe downsides to doing it. So I think, ethically, from a doping control perspective, it's all about making sure the athlete stays healthy as well. So I think that should be an important part of it, not just essentially trying to catch a cheat. So we've talked a little bit about this already. GSK and LOCOG working together in London 2012 to try and make this the cleanest games yet. And so there's going to be a lot of testing done, pre-competition as well as post-competition, after they've finished their sport. So how does it work? How does it work? So there are going to be doping control stations everywhere. In every venue that there's going to be a doping control station. 40 across 29 venues. 56 Olympic, 30 Paralympic doping control station managers, of which I think I have the privilege to be one. There's 230 doping control officers, 100 blood collection officers, 45 chaperone team leaders, and 700 chaperones. And that's just one tiny little piece, one tiny, tiny little piece of the whole process. When I came on board, which was, I think, December, there were about 2,500 people involved. I was told that by the time we got to July, it would go up to 180,000 in terms of volunteers. And all of these people need to be trained and shown, what their role is and how it fits. So the whole piece is huge, in terms of orchestration of people to make it run smoothly. So, how does it work? Well, it's broken down into various stages for simplicity. At the far end, you can see what are called the chaperones. And it's the chaperones, they're the ones who make the first contact with the athlete. They're on the field of play. They know who they're going to invite to be involved in a doping control. So they introduce themselves, and there's a process, there's a form they'll fill in to make sure they've got the right person. This is all orchestrated by the CTL, the chaperone team leader, and I will interface with that individual to make sure that we're collecting who we want to collect, as it were, in terms of the medal positions and things like that. They're allowed to do certain things. I mean, it's not a question of sort of grabbing them and dragging them off to a doping control station. They will have interviews with the media, potentially all sorts of press conferences. They might want to go and put their clothes back on and things like this. So the chaperone has to be discreet. They stand away from the athlete. They don't get in the way, and they're just there to make sure that the athlete is safely delivered to the doping control station. And at that point, it's handed over to doping control officers. And these are professional people who've been doing this job for a very long time. And it's their responsibility, actually, to watch the process, if you like, for want of a better description, and to make sure that the sample has come from that athlete. Okay? And that's handled privately and is done separately. And just to give you some idea of what I look like in a Games uniform, that's me. And my role really is to make sure that process runs as smoothly as it possibly can, to make sure that the doping control stations have enough supplies of everything it needs. I've got enough chaperones, I've got enough doping control officers and blood collection officers as well. And so it's orchestrating all of that, making sure the paperwork goes to the right place, because as well as myself in there and the group that I've just talked about, there will be members of the IOC in there will be members of WADA in there, and there are potentially going to be international monitors from different countries. So there's quite a large number of people that could potentially be in the doping control station at any one time. What sort of samples? Well, most common one will be urine, but not all drugs can be detected in urine because some of them are protein-based, so there will be blood collections as well. That will depend on the sport, so that's predetermined, if you like, and as a consequence there will be people who are collecting blood. They've all been kindly provided by the National Health Service, so they're trained already. Perhaps they might not have the experience of having to take blood when there's 7 or 8 people watching them, which might be an interesting experience for them. But I think that's something that we'll have to get used to as time goes on. Where do they go? So clearly all of these, again, have to be transported. So there are doping control stations all across the country. There's football being done in football stadiums. There's sailing down at Weymouth. There's the mountain biking out in Southend. And then even across London, there's lots and lots of different venues. So all of the samples that are being collected have to be packaged, make sure they're carried properly. And a lot of work has gone into the vessels themselves. They're tamper-proof once they're closed, that's it. Nobody can get into them at all. They're all packaged in a certain way, and then they're securely transferred to the laboratory down in Harlow, which again is under fairly tight control as well. Once they're in there, then it's simply a question of taking the one sample, sample A, but you'll hear a little bit more about that in a minute or two. And then it depends upon the sport and what the requests are for what kind of tests will be done. One thing about the sample, of course, is once it's there, it's got to have continuity. So whatever was taken, that sample has to track absolutely through the process to make sure it's the right sample that was taken and the right result that came out. So that's an important feature of this whole process, which perhaps has been GSK has been able to help with. Before I cover that, what I'll do again is I'll play a little video just to give you some feel for what's actually going to happen in the laboratory. was a very quick snapshot of roughly what's going to happen in terms of laboratory. So the other things that I guess GSK has been able to help with from its ability to develop pharmaceuticals over the years is, I guess many of you have heard of high throughput screening. So in order to look for new drug candidates, a lot of work is done very early on to try and find a molecular template that works. So that means sifting through millions and millions of different chemical structures. So there's an automation process, a lot of robotics are now used to do that. So handling this many samples in such a short period of time, we have a lot of experience about how you use that kind of system. I mean, there's about 400 samples a day will be processed, and of those 400 samples, it may be screened for 200 to 300 different compounds. So it needs to be a systematic process that captures the right sample, takes it right through that process. And so we're involved with a lot of the automation, making sure the samples are tracked by the use of barcodes. But because the laboratory is running 24 hours a day, of course, the people working in it can't work 24 hours a day, so there's a lot of shift work involved. And because GSK, from its manufacturing plants, is used to that process, it knows how to transition people, it knows how to transfer the information from one shift to another, we've been able to put some support in behind that and help ease that process, because there'll be quite a lot of pressure to turn samples around quite fast, which means that process has to run quite smoothly. But on the analytical side as well, over the years, GSK has developed ways and methods to reduce run times. Some of these analytical processes can take quite a long period of time to run a trace. We found out ways to try and reduce that time frame. There's an example here, just by simply changing some of the components of the run, you can reduce a run time down from an hour down to about 8 minutes and still have all the information you need. So that sort of thing really helps to speed the whole process up and make it much more fast and efficient. I don't really want to give you the whole list. I mean, that was just one small section of the WADA list that I just took a snapshot of. This relates particularly to masking agents. So there's not just drugs out there that can change performance. There's also drugs there that can obliterate a spectrum, so you can't actually see anything. And these are called masking agents that you can't see whether there's a drug there or not. And these have been used to try and disguise what's been going on in a test. So there are now a number of agents that are known to do this, and so they test for those as well. But this is a tiny component. As I said, there's about 200 to 300 different components on the list. Some go in and out depending upon, I think, arguments around caffeine. Now, caffeine's a known stimulant, but everybody drinks coffee for the most part. So if you do have some coffee, how much coffee can you have before you get an advantage? So I think, for the most part, it's now off the list because it's very, very difficult for something like that. But athletes have the responsibility now to know and understand what they take, so that it's their responsibility to make sure that they're not taking something. And, it's sad to say that some athletes have accidentally taken things not knowing, where formulations might be different from one country to another. And so they've taken something thinking that they know what it is, only to find out that it's got something different in it because it was in America rather than the UK, and then they've been tested positive. So I think under those circumstances it's sad, but they do have an awful lot of support as well. So they have to be much more aware these days of those potential risks and pitfalls. Of course, the instruments that are going to be used are going to be quite sensitive instruments. They can, detect very, very small amounts of material now. They're normally either liquid chromatography or gas chromatography based with a mass spectrometer put on the end of it. So there's quite a lot of this equipment, if you like, which is standard now for these sorts of tests. But there's also this view around, so there might be some drugs where perhaps they're not necessarily on the banned list, but they are very similar in structure to what's on the banned list. So there is some information now that says it's this drug or a structural similar one that is equally deemed as inappropriate. So we're providing some highly sensitive equipment, these Orbitraps, and these are phenomenally sensitive, and mainly just to scrutinise and look for any other anomalies that if you like, a little bit out of the norm. The samples that are being collected are going to be kept for about 8 years. And so as new drugs and new understanding comes along, there'll be an opportunity to go back and have a look and see if they were there. So there's a sort of fail-safe now where those are continually going to be monitored as time goes on. I mean, the instruments are sensitive, and I've tried to just make it a little bit more simple. This is what you might expect to see if a urine sample was positive. So if you look in the top left-hand corner, you might see a profile in urine that looks a little bit like that, a trace that gets produced like that. And on the right-hand side at the top, a steroid trace might look in the blue, like 2 spikes. If the sample comes back like the one in the centre at the bottom, then clearly there is something in there that shouldn't be there. And so that would then be deemed to be a positive test, and more scrutiny would be done. Now, the instruments are extremely sensitive indeed. I've already mentioned the fact that they'll be looking for new drugs that may not be quite what they already know about. But it's also about concentration, how much of it is there, because there are certain thresholds. If you take asthma products, I mean, some athletes are asthmatic, so they will take an inhaler that will open their airways, which will help them breathe more. But you can tell the difference between whether they've taken 1 puff to alleviate their to get bronchodilation and to open up their airways, and whether they've taken several puffs to make sure their lung is fully open, as it were. So that would go above the allowable threshold, and then you'd say, well, they've taken more than they should have done. So again, it's making sure that there's an understanding between that. So it's not just whether it's there or not, it's how much is there. And sometimes these things, they last a long time. Sometimes they go quite quickly as well. So it is a sort of investigative process. You're looking for a needle in a haystack a lot of the time. But a lot of metabolites are known. They fragment, they break down, so you have to understand not only what the parent molecule was, but also what the fragments might look like as well. So at the end of this process, what happens then? Well, if it's positive, it doesn't end there. Obviously, they have to do retests, they have to make sure that it is what they think it is, so it will go through another round of that. But also there is sample B. So again, if it is positive, then the athlete certainly has the right to have that sample tested somewhere else, independently, and they also have the right to appeal, of course, to explain how they might have ended up with a positive test. I think at the end of the day, all of this there really is to make this show the greatest show on earth, as fair as possible, so that when people do stand up on the podium, they're there because they've worked hard for the last 4 years, and they've been successful at the highest level of sport they possibly can be. I think, when some of the scandals arose in the sort of, in the formative years, it kind of put a downer on it, because then the arguments were, well, are they cheating, are they not cheating? I think particularly cycling like the Tour de France, there's been an awful lot over the years, and so it kind of dents the credibility of sport. So by doing this, the hope is that people will abide by it, and they all know in advance now that this is what's going to take place. So they should be expecting somebody to be saying, excuse me, would you like to come along and participate in a doping control test? It is the athlete's responsibility, but it's also the responsibility of the nations that are providing the athletes to make sure that they're clean as well. So Claire mentioned a little bit about other things that GSK is doing. One of the programs that I've also been involved in is this event called Scientists in Sport. I've done 2 or 3. I've been out to schools and universities, and we've provided this little process, this little spot test, which is an opportunity for some of the students to look at 3 urine samples from a tennis player, an archer, I think, and a cyclist, and then to see whether or not they're taking steroids or whether they're taking beta blockers. And it's a very simple little test. Colours change. It can be done very quickly and very easily. But even a simple test like this, I think they get a little bit concerned when they think, are we really going to be testing urine? Which kind of causes a little bit of a calamity normally. But once they're past that, I think they find it really engaging, because then it brings in about, well, who's cheated, who's not cheated. And it can really inspire youngsters to see how you can use science in a very positive way in sport. As a consequence of this, Graham Edmonds was mentioned earlier on. I've worked with Graham. He's come in and done some of this with me. He's a terrific chap, really inspirational as a sportsman. He has an injury that he got in a motorcycle accident that's left him, his legs in a poor shape at the lower end. But he's risen above that, and he's managed to perform now at the top end of his sport. And he's got 2 gold medals in the last 2 games, the Athens Games and the Beijing Games. And, all being well for him in London 2012, he will do his best to get a 3rd gold medal. I've also worked with Jeff Parsons, and that was a funny story in itself, really, because I turned up to the University of Bedford and met Jeff, and I hadn't met him before, at least I didn't think I had. And then I thought, you look very familiar to me, and I'm not quite sure why. It turned out I went to school with his brother, who's also the same height. They think they're both 6'7", so they're tall people. Jeff was a few years below his brother, and Jeff went into high jumping and went to a couple of Olympic Games. And his brother went into the oil industry, of all places. But and it was really odd, because then, the moment you click and you make a connection, I thought, I've also seen you in competition. And of course it turns out that he was a part of the London Athletic Club, which is the oldest athletic club in the country, I believe, and Blackheath Harriers, which is the 2nd oldest athletic club in the country. So it was nice to catch up with Jeff, and we shared some old times. So that was really enjoyable. But what that's been doing is, as I say, it's been going around with into schools and into universities and talking a little bit about how doping control works, like I have done tonight. And also listening to Graham's view about anti-doping. He's a very good, he's a real supporter of it. He believes it's really important for sport. And the way he does it is super, So if you get the opportunity to listen to some of these people, they really can be quite inspirational. So I'll draw a line there. I'm hoping that as part of the work that we're doing in GSK, we'll be supporting the Olympic legacy, which is around trying to inspire a generation. So bringing the youngsters along as well. I feel very privileged as an individual to get this opportunity. I'm very excited. I'm also very apprehensive because it's only 4 weeks away, and then I'll be there. But I'm looking forward to it, and I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for your attention, and I guess if there's any questions. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Claire and Dave. So it's now open to questions. Because there's a live webcast and people are watching this around the world, we do want you to ask a question, but to wait for the microphones, and then, if you don't mind, say who you are, anything about yourself, and then ask the question. So there are 2 microphones here, one at the front and one at the back. And Claire and Dave will try to answer the questions. So,
yes. Are you able to give a figure on the cost to GlaxoSmithKline of their involvement? I speak as a shareholder and a former employee.
I don't have a cost that I can give you. It's been a relationship that's been one based on value in kind. So it's not as if that GSK has paid a check to LOCOG, as other sponsors will have done. It's all around the value of the services that we are offering within that, and obviously the facilities that we've been able to provide as well. But I think you'll find that there will be great return on that investment, so I wouldn't worry as a GSK shareholder.
Okay, the gentleman at the back is going to... if you possibly could say who you are as well. Thank you.
Jeff Hayward.
Thank you.
I'm still a bit unclear as to who's going to be tested and exactly when. I'm thinking in terms of heats and semi-finals. You mentioned medalists would be checked, but also Paralympians. Surely some of those are on prescription drugs. Do they get an exemption? And sprinters and strength events. Have they been tested during the winter months, which is when they build up their muscle? I don't think they'd be silly enough to take them during the games.
Thank you. Some good questions there.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe I'll try which ones to cover first. In terms of testing goes on throughout the year these days. WADA run a process that randomly tests people right across the world on a regular basis because of that opportunity, if you like, to test out of event time. So that does take place. Just an interesting statistic. I mean, in this country, about the same number of tests are conducted in a year that we will conduct within the next month. So it's that kind of scale. So it's throughout the year and it's fairly regular. Now, what were the other questions?
Well, one is how are they selecting the half?
How do they select? Well, the top 5 will be tested anyway of every event where a medal is being contested. The reason for that is if anybody in the top 3 does get to be found positive, they will want, people who haven't been so as to step up, as it were. The rest, they're going to be tested all the time. I mean, before competition starts, so the moment they move into the athletes' village, a testing program will start. For each individual sport, there is a process that is already in place for them on how you select. It's done randomly in all the pre-medal type events. So each one has a process to deal with that that's already well established, and all the sportsmen know and understand that.
Okay, and then the other aspect of the question was about Paralympic athletes who might be on prescriptions or whatever.
If Olympians or Paralympians are taking a prescription medicine, they have to notify that that's what they're on. So it's very clear right at the outset what medication they're on, what they're taking. So that can then be discounted from the analysis. So that it's already been approved, they know what it is, so they will dismiss it. That won't be seen as a positive test.
And steroids.
What about steroids?
Are they tested during the winter months?
You were saying that it is through the year.
Yeah, the whole process. So these days, the whole process is continual.
Well, to sum up all those questions, you're confident that anybody will be spotted?
Yes. I think the other thing about the process as well is that both the IOC and WADA will be putting samples through that are positive to test the lab, to make sure that the lab is doing its job and it is picking it up. So there is that as well as a safeguard, just to make sure that everything is as good as it can be.
That's very interesting. Claire?
Speaking to somebody like Graham Edmonds, I mean, he'll give you the insight that every single day of the year, including Christmas Day, he has to provide his whereabouts in a certain hour in every day, so that he knows that in any day, again, including Christmas Day, somebody could rock up to him within that hour where he said where he's going to be and ask him to complete a drugs test. Which happens randomly and at several times throughout the year. So athletes are continuously tested out of competition time, as well as in competition time as well.
I think another point to add to that as well, particularly relating to Graham, the first time I met him, he said, "Can I have a drink?" And I said, and he had a bottle with him, and I said, "Sure, I'll go and get you one." He said, "I don't wish to be rude, but I'd like to see you do it." He said, "Because I need to be sure that, whatever I take is, not likely to be tampered with." And it was only water, so he was quite happy to take a bottle that's sealed, that's unopened, but he wouldn't be interested in anything that had been opened by somebody else. So he's very, very acutely aware of his responsibilities.
Good, thank you. Good cluster of questions. Thank you very much. Here and then here.
I'm Brian Shelley. I'm a chemistry teacher. Having done lots of experiments myself with pupils, not of this standard, of course, can you guarantee your results are going to be 100% reliable? If not, is there a degree of reliability involved?
Thank you.
I think the type of mass spectrometer that are used today are pretty foolproof. You know, it will be what it will be on the test. The margins of error these days are very, very small. Very small. Particularly with things like the LTQ Orbitrap.
That was a guarantee, was it?
I'm not in a position to guarantee. That's King's.
Okay, thank you. The lady here, and then there's a lady halfway back, and then a young lady here.
Ruth Williams. I'm an analytical scientist from the Open University. You mentioned that you were involving the NHS in collecting blood samples. I'm interested in how you are managing to provide all these analytical scientists to carry out the analyses. I assume that you must have been recruiting and training quite a few people to staff the laboratories. Can you tell us a little bit about how you've managed to do this?
Thank you.
That's not my responsibility, as obviously that's the responsibility of LOCOG to do that. They've had a programme for the last 4 years that's been working its way up to the Olympic Games and making sure that all these processes are in place. So it's been their responsibility to orchestrate, decide what's needed, how many people are needed, where they're going to be needed, what experience they've had, and all of that. So I can't really say much more than that, I'm afraid, because that's beyond my exposure, as it were, to what I've seen.
So there may be a lot of unemployed analysts at the end of the Olympics.
I don't think so, because the analysts are being provided by King's. So pardon? Well, if you looked at the video, they're being supported by all the other people who are involved in anti-doping from around the world. But the numbers of people down at the testing laboratory are enough to be able to cover the number of tests they need to cover.
Thank you. We've got a question there, then at the front, then on this side, yes.
Stephanie Dowker, retired chemist. I recall some time ago there was a question about natural endogenous compounds such as erythropoietin and how one could establish whether the level of that was appropriate. What's the current situation on natural?
I'm not sure I could give you an answer to that one. I mean, EPO has been known for a number of years now, and I guess they've worked out within reason what is an acceptable level of it, and also, you know, how much of the hematocrit changes. So how many red cells should be there? And I guess this is an evolving area because it's now being called a biological passport. So each athlete has a range of parameters that are their parameters. And then what you're looking for then is changes within that to see whether it's fluctuating very much. So it's an evolving process, but certainly as far as EPO is concerned, a fair number of people I think have been found to have had more EPO than they should have had, physiologically at least.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Bridget and I'm a sixth form student. Am I right in thinking that if an athlete is found to have taken drugs, they're not allowed to re-enter the Olympic Games in years to come? Is that true? Is that...
That's down to I think the recent
it's changed.
The recent ruling has changed. You may recall the Dwayne Chambers chase that's been in the press, where he obviously has been banned in the past for taking banned substances, and he's obviously defended his right through the courts in order to be able to represent his country, which I think he was successful in doing so.
And what's your position on this? Do you think that they should be allowed to compete again, or...?
We don't make a comment on our position on it. Obviously, our role is about making sure that if an athlete is in the position where they want to cheat, then we'll catch them, and we'll manage the integrity of that through making sure that the systems and the procedures together with King's, that are in place are as robust as possible, so that if somebody's doing it, then the system will be found to work.
Okay, thank you.
Bridget, it wouldn't be fair for me to ask you a question, but just for the general audience, the Royal Society of Chemistry has hosted a number of events for school pupils and particularly sixth form students. And one I was sitting at the back of, the students were adamant that people should be banned for life from the Olympics. And as has been said, the legal system has come to the opposite conclusion. One of the things I wanted to ask in that, but I didn't want to interrupt, was what students felt about exam students who might take beta blockers, which apparently happens, believe it or not, and should they be banned from taking exams for life? It's very interesting that students by and large are gung-ho on banning and being definite about that. The legal system tends to say we mustn't be over the top. There has to be a proportionality and give people another chance. I'd be interested if any invigilators, examiners or anybody else has a view on that. I'm not asking you to come back on that. Well, you can if you want to.
I think it just depends. I think it just depends who you are, because obviously if you're an athlete competing, then you'll want them to be banned and never to compete again. And same if you're a student, you wouldn't want someone who's cheated to come back and sit the exam again. I think it depends what point of view you take and where you're from and who you are, really.
Thank you very much. A+. Over here. Thank you, Bridget.
Hi, my name is Chiara Cappelletti. I'm a chemist. Looking back at the previous Olympic Games, how many positives are you expecting to find? Well, hopefully none, but realistic.
I think it's very hard to judge, but I think in the Athens Games, and please don't quote the figures because they're sort of the back of my head, I think there's around 25 in the Athens Games and around 8 in Beijing, so the numbers had come down. Who knows, because there's more tests, so the numbers of tests have gone up, and they're going to be before and during, so I think it's very, very hard to know, really.
They're expecting to find all the ones that have been put in there by the International Olympic Committee, otherwise they're in trouble. But
indeed, yes. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, I'm Darren Smith. I'm a chemist and a patent attorney. I had a question about accuracy and false positives, but I think you addressed that. But I was considering that in other fields of security, it's conventional to have well publicised security features so as to have the maximum deterrent effect, and then some maybe secret or half-secret features for maximum effectiveness at catching people. And I wondered whether that sort of strategy applies in a doping detecting situation as well.
Thank you very much.
I'm not sure I'm the right person to ask of that. I think Professor David Cowan would probably be able to give you a far better answer than I, because that's his area of expertise, really, I'm afraid. So I apologise, but I'm not sure I could answer the question fairly for you.
Back here. Thank you. Feel free, by the way, in the audience, if you want to answer the question, or your own question.
That'd be nice, actually, yes.
Yeah. Please, you don't have to be only putting up your hand to ask a question, but if you've got a comment.
Hello, my name is Emma Sadler. I'm from HFL Sports Science. Incidentally, we're doing the equestrian testing. Okay. I just wondered if you got any of the compounds added to the WADA list since Beijing have given you a particular challenge.
Thank you.
I can't help you, I'm afraid.
No, it's again, it's that's Professor Cowan's domain, I'm afraid. I mean, you know, my role is making sure the collection processes work. All the supply, the laboratory gets the samples it's meant to get, and they're all correctly done. Once it's gone into that environment, that's Professor Cowan's domain. So I'm sure he's happy to answer your question if you contact him.
Okay, last sweep of any questions anybody's got or any comments they want to make at the back.
Richard Port, Royal Society of Chemistry. I seem to remember cases of positives where athletes have disputed the findings and they say the sample's been tampered with. Have the procedures for handling the samples improved in recent years, or are they the same procedures that have been used in the past?
No, I think they've improved enormously based upon some of the lessons learned from past experience. The equipment that we'll be using for London 2012 is using tamper-proof bottles that once they're sealed you can't get into them without using the machine that's based in the laboratory to remove the top. Also, the process that is conducted is all conducted by the athlete. So the doping control officer doesn't touch anything. The athlete touches everything. And the athlete is responsible for providing the sample and actually has to pour it into the bottle and screw it tight to make sure it's locked properly so that there's no confusion on how that sample has been sampled and collected.
Thank you. Any other questions? In a minute I'm going to ask Claire and David if there's anything else they want to say by way of rounding off this evening. I suppose the thrust of some of these questions could be put in another way. Dave, your expertise in chemistry and science more generally, you're not allowed to say, I think so-and-so, this athlete looks a bit dodgy to me, wide-eyed look or whatever.
Yeah.
Why isn't that person being randomly tested?
I have to be completely impartial. My role is just simply to make sure the process works properly. I am not involved in any way with the... I'm involved in the random selection process. I will be there and I will be part of that process, but that will be in the presence of the IOC and WADA and the UCI who will be doing all the cycling-based events. So all of that will be done, again, discreetly, clearly, and out of view of everybody else. But that is how that process works.
And Claire, given the engagement of GSK in it, there must be a slight risk to the firm that something goes wrong or that some employee is overawed by the event and loses their sense of focus and there is a breach of security or something. How are people trained to live up to the highest standards for your firm?
Well, I think it was a real privilege, first of all, that LOCOG asked us to supply the 10 individuals that we did. We went through quite a thorough recruitment process to find the stars of our business. And I guess it's important to say that whilst Dave is a scientist, these roles aren't reliant on people being scientists and having that scientific knowledge. It was more about the calibre and the demeanour of the person that was in that role. They need to be able to think on their feet. They need to be able to lead a team of people. They will have experts that they can call on. So it was much more based on the leadership qualities of the people that were coming through. Now, we appointed people like Dave and his colleagues at the very back end of last year. So they've been under quite an intense training programme with LOCOG over the last 6 months. So, we were talking about that tonight. I think whilst you can't prepare for every eventuality, I think coupled with the kind of people, and we've only put quite senior people into these positions, from GSK and people that we're really confident will be able to represent GSK in the best possible way. And certainly the focus or the feedback that we've had from LOCOG is that these people are assets to GSK, and I think we're very proud that they're able to represent us.
Thank you very much. Is there anything either of you wanted to add? In other words, was there a question that should have been asked?
No, I don't think so. Just again, thank you very much for your time. It's obviously a great topic to be able to talk about, and I know we enjoy talking about it non-stop. Thank you for indulging us tonight.
Okay. I hope you found it interesting, and you perhaps have a different perspective when if you don't get the opportunity to be in a stadium somewhere and you're sitting at home watching the television, you may be able to see some of this orchestration taking place before your very eyes and go, well, I think I've seen that, or at least I understand a little bit about what's going on now. So I hope that's been insightful, at least to some degree. So
I'm sure. And before I ask you to show your appreciation again and then to join us for tea and coffee, just two things. One is, I'm interested, as you heard, in the history of sport, and particularly the Olympics. There is some criticism of commercial firms being involved. This is a collection of essays, 1896 to 1956, where for the Melbourne Olympics, to raise money, producing a book, and they had somebody from each Olympic Games in the modern era. So in 1896, Sir George Robertson, who competed, didn't do very well, but he was still alive in 1956 and wrote an essay about what it was like in Athens, 1896. He was pretty upset because they didn't have his discipline in the Olympics. He was a hammer thrower. So he got there and he had to throw the discus, and Greeks turned out to be quite good at that. He had to go at tennis and didn't do very well in that. But he did compose and recite a Greek ode in the closing ceremony. And annoyingly for him, one of his friends from university was there as a spectator and was prevailed upon to join in the tennis and won. This is John Pius Boland, the first Irish/British double gold medal winner, won the singles and doubles. But this publication was sponsored by Bovril to raise money to send the Olympians to 1956 Melbourne. And that was before Paralympians had the event at the same place always. That happened in 1960. And the other thing I wanted to say is that although we assume we're going to win loads of medals, not so long ago we weren't doing that well. In 1976 Montreal, the GB track and field athletics, men and women, won between them no gold medals, no silver medals, one bronze medal, which was by a chemistry graduate and teacher, namely? Correct. Good. So I'm sure on one occasion the Royal Society of Chemistry will bring together all the chemists involved in past and present Olympics, but I think this has been a very special evening, and I drive past that GSK billboard all the time, and it's a great privilege to understand a little more what's going on behind that. So please join me in thanking Claire and Dave. Thank you very much. Thank you. And please join us. Thank you. When we